Hello and welcome back to our Fanny Crosby story. Do you remember what happened last time? Fanny was able to go to a school for blind people to learn. Well, at first, this transition was very hard for her. She began to make friends and adjust to life in a new place. Fanny was very talented and good at school, especially at memorizing. Students and teachers began to notice Fanny's talent, but they also began to notice something else. Fanny received many compliments about her poetry and her music. Fanny enjoyed these compliments, and she started to think she was pretty special. One morning after breakfast, Dr. Jones, the school's superintendent, called Fanny into his office. Fanny thought to herself as she entered the room, "He wants me to write a poem for some special occasion or compliment me about something good I have done." Instead, she heard these surprising words. "Fanny, I am sorry you have believed what others have said about your poems. You really know very little about poetry. You'd be wise to not spend so much time thinking up poems and waiting for people to praise you. Instead, seek to please God by becoming who He wants you to be. Then, His words will flow through your writing." Fanny was shocked and hurt. Tears spilled over onto her cheeks. It would have been easy to be angry. But something inside her said, "He's telling you the truth, Fanny, and it is for your own good." Her voice trembled. "Dr. Jones, you have talked to me as my father would have talked were he living. Thank you. Forgive me for being proud of what I have done." Soon, Fanny began helping others by tutoring students. The students learned, and Fanny discovered she loved to teach. "I shall become a teacher," she decided. But still, she continued her poetry, one poem after another. Again, Fanny was called into Dr. Jones's office. He was afraid she was writing poems to escape her other work. In a solemn voice, he announced, "You are to write no poetry for 3 months." 3 months? Fanny couldn't believe it. Words floating around in her head as she tried to study. Words floated around in her head as she tried to study. Words floated around in her head as she tried to study. Words she wanted to put into poems, but she wasn't allowed to. Rhymes filled her mind when she tried to recite in class. She couldn't concentrate. She couldn't study. She failed in her classes. "I can't stand this," Fanny cried to herself. "But I must obey. How will I ever get through these 3 months?" Fanny tried to study, but she just couldn't. Everything in her mind was so mixed up. Knock, knock, knock. "Come in," Fanny called. "Dr. Jones wants to see you in his office," a student told Fanny. Fanny's heart pounded as she left her room and once again went to Dr. Jones's office. This was the 3rd time she stood in his office. What is he going to say, she worried. It's been 6 weeks since I've written a poem. "Fanny, the teachers tell me your grades are slipping. Why is this?" Truthfully, she answered, "I think of poems constantly. I've tried not to, but I can't help it." Dr. Jones tapped his pen against the desk. "Can you get good grades and pay attention in class if you were allowed to write poetry again?" "Oh, yes, sir. I know I can," she answered with assurance. The no poetry rule was lifted, and Fanny was encouraged to write. Dr. Jones now was determined she should develop this talent. He found a private teacher who was kind but strict with Fanny. Fanny could take long, difficult poems and rewrite them in simpler language. People began calling Fanny the blind poetess. The U.S. government gave money to support the New York Institute for the Blind, so government officials often toured the school. Fanny became their most popular tour guide because she could compose and recite poems about anyone who visited the school. Once, the superintendent rushed into her room. "The President of the United States is here. Will you compose a poem?" Fanny's heart skipped a beat. "The President? I'm going to meet the President?" Fanny questioned excitedly. "What shall I say?" she thought. "How can I honor him?" 10 minutes later, she was introduced to President Tyler. Calmly, she quoted her new poem. Returning to her room, she said to herself, "I wish I could spend more time with these important men. There is so much I could learn from them." As she sat down and picked up her knitting, she had an idea. The governor of New York came to visit. Fanny entered one of the rooms in which the visitors would pass. Sitting down, she began to knit. Muffled voices and footsteps grew louder, and then the door was thrown open. The group entered the room. "Governor, this is Miss Fanny Crosby, one of our students," the superintendent said proudly. "Miss Crosby," the governor began, "I am very pleased to meet you. I've heard of your poems and read some too. You are talented, young woman." The man started to move on. The ball of yarn in Fanny's lap rolled onto the carpet and across the room. The governor stooped to pick it up, and as the yarn was rewound, he talked to Fanny. Her plan had worked. Fanny laughed when she was alone. Her needles clicked as she knitted. "I'd like to meet other famous people too, like senators and poets. I wonder who will be next to tour the school." At an evening party sometime later, Fanny's wish came true. America's well-known poet, William Bryant, visited. Shaking her hand, he said, "Miss Crosby, I'm aware of your poetry. I've read several poems by the blind poetess. You have great talent. You must continue writing." Fanny gave poems and played music for school events as well. On one occasion after playing, a mother came up to Fanny and introduced her son. "After hearing you and the other students tonight, I know that the Institute for the Blind is the best place for my son, Van," she told Fanny. "He'll be coming to the school as soon as I can arrange it. Will you please take care of him?" Fanny assured the mother that she would. That evening, Fanny paused to think as she fell asleep. She thought of her mother and how she had left for school so many years ago. "So much has happened since then," Fanny thought. "I've learned a lot. I've met important people. I wonder what Grandma would think of me now. She always said God had a special plan for me. I don't really have time to think about God. I'm too busy." Fanny was always helping a lot of people, especially the blind, to learn. Fanny used her gifts to encourage others, but she really wasn't doing this for Jesus, who had given her these gifts. Fanny needs to know Jesus as her Savior. Otherwise, she is not only physically blind, but she is spiritually in the dark as well.